Hopefully that works. Hi, everybody. I'm Alice Osborne with Wonderland Book Club, which is affiliated with the North Carolina Writers Network, the largest writing organization one of the largest in the United States. NC Writers Network is we just finished up a spring conference last Saturday, and there is a lot of great programs coming in July and in the fall. For more information is www.ncwriters.org. A lot of us here in the Zoom meeting are members of the Writers Network. Raise your hand if you are. Love you guys. And I've been a member since 2003, and I have served on the board since 2013. So I'm the secretary, and I make sure that all the meeting minutes are all set. Big responsibility, and I love it. And changed my life joining the Writers Network. Great group of people. Today we have Lena Epps Brooker as our honored guest for book club, Wonderland Book Club, and we have Hot Dogs on the Road memoir, and we are about to introduce Lena right now. And Lena's right here. Lena, say hi.
Hi.
Hey,
Hey.
this is Lena. So, intro about Lena. We have a really fun presentation for y'all, and thank you all so much for being here on this beautiful day. We have been Zooming for Wonderland Book Club for a year now. My good friend and author and steady member, Jorge Cortese, said, "A whole year, Alice." And I said, "Yeah, a whole year." We haven't missed a meeting. We hopefully will be back at Quail Ridge in the fall, maybe a little sooner. This all goes to the guidelines for the North Carolina Writers Network. Next month, we are meeting on Friday. I can tell you that it's definitely a Friday. Friday, May 28th, for Rebecca Hodges' Wild Land. And Rebecca is here in the meeting, and we are so excited. I sent out the details earlier this week, and it's right on meetup.com/Wonderland Book Club that you can check out the details, sign in, and register. Jorge is already registered because Jorge registers early. Be like Jorge and register. So we're going to have a great meeting, and I can't wait because we've had Rebecca was right before COVID hit. She was able to do in-person meetings, and she was really, really lucky. Great timing, Rebecca, by the way. So Lena is a Meredith College graduate, 62. If you read the book, there was a large portion devoted to Meredith College. And I love Meredith College. I did not go, but for many, many years, I was spending a week there for focusing on form. And we would meet at the Belk building, or the Belk Hall, which was the dining room. So that was and I knew Meredith well because I spent a lot of time every summer, maybe for 5 summers, learning fiction, memoir, and poetry at Focusing on Form, which was about 75 or so women only, and of all ages, learning writing. And of course, that series ended, well, not of course, but unfortunately it ended maybe 5 years ago. But a lot of my writing friends came from that experience, and it was wonderful. And I got to know the college really well. So that's my Meredith story. Meredith Magazine is the alumna magazine, and they published a really cool story about Lena, along with other Meredith alums who wrote. And I'm going to read a little bit from the article, which is a great way to also introduce Lena. So, growing up an American Indian girl in eastern North Carolina during the Jim Crow era, Lena Epps Brooker has many stories to tell. She went from being one of 30 American Indian students at her high school to being the first woman of color to graduate from Meredith. From there, Brooker became an elementary school teacher and became well known for her service in organizations supporting women, diversity, and the arts. But before making history, Brooker had to overcome the pain of growing up during a time of lawful segregation. Because her community was home to an almost equal percentage of people with white, black, and brown heritages, she lived under specific laws separating 3 groups of people, making for a social environment that was extremely divisive and wounding. As Brooker navigated the world outside her home in rural Robeson County, she found that many people were and still are unaware of the struggles she faced growing up as an American Indian. She knew it was important for the whole truth to be told about what the world was like during Jim Crow, and she knew she had the power to do so. And despite all the obstacles she faced living in a racist society, Brooker believed that she could embrace and embody an optimistic vision of the future. Hot Dogs on the Road was published in 2017. It features a collection of personal stories and what it was like to grow up brown in a black and white world. And one of her greatest motivators for putting pen to paper was her two daughters and her grandchildren. More than anyone, she wanted them to know the full story of her life. She also wanted her heirs to know how her parents supported her and loved her and taught her how to react to ignorance, insults, and injustice. And if you've read the book, you know that her parents are, they were everything. And she grew up with wonderful emotional and love, support and love. Their responses resulted in my positive self-esteem and my lifelong commitment to believing all people deserve respect, she says. Being that American Indians have historically been subjected to stereotypes and discrimination in popular culture in the minds of many, this book was an opportunity for her to change the narrative around her heritage. And since publishing the book, she's had the opportunity to talk about the book in readings, signings, and discussions. And in 2019, the book was added to the shelves at Carlisle Campbell Library at Meredith. And she says this in her own words, that even though she wasn't really confident in her writing skills when she arrived at Meredith 60 years ago, the fact that the book now sits on the shelves of the library is a powerful symbol of her perseverance. And she may even write a second book, and we hope so, perhaps a sequel to the first one or an inspirational piece about her late husband Jim's battle with cancer. Please know more about Hot Dogs on the Road. Contact Lena. We'll have her email at the end. And I give you Lena Epps Brooker.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here. I'm always very happy to share about hot dogs, how it came to be, why it came to be. But it's of special significance to me to be back with people in Raleigh, because Raleigh has always had a very special place in my heart. As a child, we would sometimes take a detour on the way to see my paternal grandparents who lived outside of Roxborough. And when we made those detours into Raleigh, it was always really special for me. As a very young child, my parents always made a point of pointing out the state capitol and saying, this is our state capital. This is the capital of North Carolina. And I was always, it just drew me to Raleigh. I loved history. I loved government as a child. I read a lot. And so when I ended up in Raleigh as a student, and many years later, living in the Midwest, my husband said, let's go back south. And he said, so what we'll do is just travel around and find the city that we want to live in. Well, I knew where I wanted to live. And we went to those cities, but we ended up in Raleigh. So for more than 25 years, we lived there. And it was during the time that my children, our children, both daughters, one of whom is here now, who gave me some tips on hopefully how to do Zoom yesterday. As they were growing up, we would go to Robinson County, and of course to visit my parents and relatives. But they would say, well, what did you do when you were growing up? Where did you go to the movies? And we lived out in the country, 7 miles between Lumberton and the little town of St. Paul's on Highway 301, when Highway 301 was the main north-south route before 95. Where'd you go to the movies? And so I would show them, and I would say, but we entered on the side. Oh, why did you do that? Because that was the way it was. That was the law. Or did you go, where did you hang out? And I would drive across the river and show them the one big restaurant cafe that was owned by an Indian man or two brothers. And I would say to them, this is where we hung out. It was called the Old Foundry. And it was there that we could go inside, or we could do the drive-in. And when I was older, college age, it's where we had the big parties upstairs in a building that had the fire inspector come. The whole place would have been shut down. But I began to realize that what I was telling the children was true. I showed them things. I showed them places. We talked about, well, I grew up on the schoolyard of the grounds of the school I attended, where my dad was principal. And it was an all Indian school. Everything was three-way segregated because we had a almost equally populated three ways group of people in the county: white, black, and brown. And so there were three different ways of life, if you will. And we talked about that in factual manners. This is where I went to school. No, there were not black people in school with me. No, I didn't go to school with white people, except when an Indian woman had married a black person and lived in the community. If they could not get to their school, they came to my school. My dad would not ever turn anybody away, no matter what the law said. What I realized was that facts, what I knew was that facts are just one part of life. Feelings are another. And what I chose to do when the children were younger and even older, I told them the facts, but I did not want to raise the possibility of imbuing a spirit of hatred or dislike for people who had not treated us in a kind or just manner. So, because I had been taught that way myself, I wanted them to be free to be open to all people. And, but I also wanted them to know about the pain, my feelings, how discrimination had affected me personally. And so it was that reason that led me to think I need to write a book. I didn't call it a book. I'm going to write stories that will be the same thing as if I were talking to them about how this impacted me. It's not an academic study. I'm not an academician. And so I sat down. At this point, my husband was semi-retired, and we were living between Raleigh and Emerald Isle. And so after I made the decision that I really wanted to write the stories that would reflect how racism affected me at different times in my life, one afternoon I sat down and I outlined the book. I knew exactly, well, before we go there, look at this. We moved to Asheville, outside of Asheville. And we call our home, we found property, built a house here on the side of a mountain. And the property itself, the views are so beautiful that I immediately thought I was in a little heaven here. And so I named the property High Heaven. We are in a neighborhood of 13 homes, but everybody, you can see some houses, but you're not on top of anyone. We lived here, as I said, I had already done the outline of the book. I sat down one afternoon prior to coming here in Raleigh, and I jotted down places that were important in my life and times in my life that that had an impact, that the story would tell both the facts and the feelings of discrimination. And so I brought that with me to what became High Heaven. And my husband, Jim, as you can see, he was a very big, tall, as my mother said, white boy from up north. And when I said to her, Mom, Jim is from Virginia, that's not exactly like being way up north. And she said, well, it's north of here. And she was right. But when I told Jim about my idea of writing some of the stories down, he became my biggest supporter. And he probably wouldn't have been had he known how much proofreading he was going to do, and how many hours that took and how many years it took. Because when we came here, isn't this a beautiful view? This is springtime here at twilight. When we came here, we built the house. I had never gardened. I got involved in gardening. I've always played tennis. In the meantime, I went into some lay ministry training, and I wrote. And I wrote mostly in the wintertime. So that's a big reason of why it took so many years to finish the book. But finding the time was not critical at one point until I realized that I had grandsons. And all of a sudden I had grandsons, and I needed to get busy on the writing. So I wrote the stories that I already had the outline for and the name of the book. And I realized that for most people who write, that is not the way you do it. You know, you don't start with an outline. I had not only the outline, I had the names of the stories. And that didn't change except for the last few months as I was editing the other stories. My husband said, are you not going to write anything about your grandparents? And I'm like, well, I hadn't planned to. And he said, well, you need to do that. So I added a story about both maternal and paternal grand stories. Otherwise, the outline of the book stayed the same. Were there challenges in writing the book? Absolutely. I will share something with you that made me put my writing in a file folder and put it in a drawer and not look at it for 5 years. I have I had a relative whom I admired, and he was educated. And I sent that person, I asked that person if they would read a couple of the stories. I wanted input. I was not confident with my writing. I was not an English major. At school, in college, I almost flunked out of Meredith because of English. And I sent them, and I knew that I needed to improve my writing. I knew that. I knew that I would have to have a lot of editing. But I sent it and waited expectantly for the response. And I remember sitting at the beach house, opening the letter, and the person had actually edited the story, which I was glad of. And do you remember when you were in college or in high school and you wrote and your instructor returned your paper and it was all red marks? Well, that's what this was like. And a lot of very good points that I needed to pay more attention to and to learn how to do. But there was also a letter, and the letter basically said, I don't understand why you are writing this. Who do you think would be interested in this? What's the point? I was crushed. I was devastated. Because if that person didn't see any value in what I had thought was important, a person I admired, then I was certain that I needed to put that down. And I did for 5 years, never touched it. It was only when both my brothers were here at High Heaven, they had come for a visit, just the two of them. And when that happened, everybody said what the Epps children did when they got together was stay up late night at talk. And so one of them said to me, how's the book coming? And I said, well, it isn't. And they said, why not? And I said, because, and I told them the story. And there was quiet. And one brother said, well, you just have to write. And I said, no, I don't have to write. And the other brother was very silent for a long time. And he said, I know why that response came to you. And I'm like, well, you just tell me that. And he said, because that person is still feeling the pain. They don't want to be reminded. And so you need to write the book, not for them, but for you and your children. And in the meantime, after that conversation, I told Jim about it, and he said, I've been thinking about this, Lena. This is not just a book for your for our girls and our grandsons. He said, when this book comes out, this is a tribute to your parents. This is a tribute to your people for their perseverance and determination. And he said, and oh, by the way, I think a lot of non-Indian people will be interested and they can learn. It's a way of teaching people. So that's how I got back in writing. The other big challenge was I had met an author who introduced me to an owner publisher in North Carolina. And I had always hoped that because I was a native North Carolinian, had lived here most of my life, and because North Carolina has the largest American Indian population east of the Mississippi. I thought this will be a perfect fit, maybe. Somebody would like to publish it. So I got the letter back from that person, and what was said is this: interesting stories. We would really like to publish them, but can you do some rewriting and make them a little happier? And I'm like, I just sort of was stunned, and then I broke out laughing, and I said, well, no, hell, I can't do that. This is the truth. This is not fiction. This is about real life. And so when I shared that to with my husband, he said, well, okay, here's the deal. Just write the book and we will get it published. Just don't worry about it. You need to write the book. And so I did. After many years, it came to be. Jim read, he was my main proofreader, and I had to remind him that we talked differently, we wrote differently, and I appreciated all of his input, especially with looking for grammar and that kind of thing. But most of the time I didn't take his advice because it was his voice, but he read everything over and over again, many times. And so when before the book came, I had said many years before, as I started writing the book, a dear friend, childhood friend of mine, Gloria Morrison, and she became Lowry, became the premier Lumbee artist. And I contacted her many years before even thinking about putting a pencil to paper, and asked her if she would do the painting for the cover of the book. And when I finally contacted her about 15 years later and said, Gloria, I'm ready for you to do the painting, she said, oh, I thought I'd never live long enough to see this. And so she sent the painting, and I was so excited, but so nervous about it, that I gave the painting package to Jim and asked him to open it. And I watched his expression. And after that, I knew that it was beautiful. One of the poignant things with him in the book was that the day that I got the final copy in my hands, I had a tennis match that morning. And I was so excited and so scared. I left the book and put a note on it for Jim. And I said, here's the book. You might want to look at it. And when I came home from tennis, this is a photograph of him with the book. And I walked in, I spoke to him, and he didn't speak. And I said, Jim, hello. And he looked up and he said, what's quoted here? All those stories I read and reread, well, now they're a book. A book. And the book is far better than each little story. In a word, the book would not have happened without him. And I'm very grateful to him for all the support he gave me. I think that now I will read one selection from the book, and what I'm going to read. I don't have the time. I don't see the time. Am I doing okay on time?
You're doing great on time, Lena.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to read a selection from the book, from the awareness section. The first story of that section is called Sicker Than Before. Nobody I ever knew wanted to be sick. I especially getting sick when I was a little girl because in addition to feeling bad, I was certain that being sick meant resting, and resting wasn't one of my favorite things to do. In spite of my generally healthy childhood and dislike of resting, I did get sick occasionally. Most often, I suffered from what some in the family called, quote, bad tonsils, and that the doctor was diagnosed as tonsillitis. My mother, at our home, the sick children were treated with compassion, loving care, and specific remedies. For sore throats, very hot salt water gargle was the first treatment. But my favorite at-home medicinal remedy was one that Mama made herself. Homemade lemonade, heated very hot and served in 1-cup servings at bedtime, was the best medicine I ever took. Some thought it was the lemon juice that made it so effective, and I'm sure that helped. Its real power, however, was in its main ingredient. Hot lemonade was pure, unrefined love. It was so good, one could almost hope not to feel well or to exaggerate about how one felt, just in order to get more lemonade. On one of the rare occasions when even hot lemonade didn't cure me or make me at least feel better, my dad took me to a doctor in Longitude for professional medical attention. It was a school day, and I was no more than 8 years old. As I watched the people in the doctor's office, my dad talked to the office staff. When he returned to where I was sitting, he said we'd have a wait before the doctor would see us. He then asked if I thought I would be comfortable alone while he walked a couple of blocks to the bank to attend to some business. I know that's shocking now, but back then, you didn't worry about people kidnapping your child out of the doctor's office, and it was a half block away. For a short time, I knew how to behave. I would sit quietly and look around at all the other people. I would read a magazine or a book, or if one were in my reach, maybe I'd get lucky and there would be a child's Bible that had pictures of Jesus and the disciples in it. I would like that, but I knew that I would not get up and walk around. That wasn't part of behaving well when you were away from home, according to my parents. For a short time, I looked at the people in the waiting room. I became aware that all the people had pale skin, and I was the darkest person in the room. But so what? That's just the way it happened to be on this day, in this doctor's office. Abruptly, a door opened, and a nurse dressed in all white came out and began to call people's names. She scanned the room, and her eyes seemed to rest on me. I began to get a bit nervous. I didn't want to go back to see the doctor without my dad. I didn't know what to say to the doctor. Please don't call my name, I thought, and she didn't. The nurse continued to look in my direction, and I believed she was staring at me. I began to get uncomfortable. Then I became fearful. Something in this woman's eyes made me want to leave, to run, to hide, but I couldn't do any of those things. I'd promised Dad I'd wait for him to return. Quickly, the nurse walked to where I was sitting, stopped in front of me, and demanded in a loud voice, "What are you doing in here?" I was too scared to reply. I thought everyone knew that while we were there, we were all sick. "What are you doing in here?" she asked in an even louder, mad-sounding voice. By now, it seemed that everybody in the room had turned their eyes to me. My dad brought me to see the doctor. A tiny, soft voice replied. Was that me talking? And without warning, tears began to fall from my eyes. They matched the size of my voice. Tiny, tiny, with barely any weight to them at all. "Well, you are in the wrong room. You don't belong here. You must leave this room now. You are in the wrong room." The nurse stopped speaking and continued to stare at me for what seemed to be an hour. Finally, she turned and walked away from me. Oh God, I was so scared. I was humiliated. I was afraid. I thought I was going to die on the spot. I felt nauseated. I was terrified and I was embarrassed. But more than anything, I was confused. Daddy did come back, but it felt like he was gone forever. After one look at my face, he asked me what was wrong. All I could manage to say was that the nurse had said I didn't belong in that room. The uninvited tears began to trickle again. There were no sobs, just tears on my young brown face. Together, we waited in silence for our turn to see the doctor. What the doctor said to either my dad or me is lost forever. I don't know what diagnosis he made or what, if any, medicine he prescribed. Whatever was wrong with me when I went there didn't compare to the dull heartache that lingered long after I left. I didn't know it at the time that I had experienced in full force the side effects of one of the deadliest diseases known to humankind, racism. Even Mama's hot lemonade, loaded with love and sugar, wasn't strong enough to relieve the pain I felt after I left the doctor's office and returned home. Yes, I was sicker than before Daddy had taken me to town to be made well. That story, thank you. That story was the first time that I had experienced pain of racism. I knew racism existed. We didn't call it that. It's the way life was. There were places we couldn't go. Why? Because that's the way it was. Because that was the law. It was the way the social norms of the day were for most people. Separation. And knowing that and living in isolation, basically, with just people who were like me and who accepted me, that didn't cause pain. And also, as I got older, my parents would say, well, this will change. We know it will change. This is wrong. But when you're 8 years old, to be confronted with rejection, humiliation, embarrassment, that hurt. That was the introduction to the pain that can be associated with it. And it's a young age at which to experience that kind of thing. It was so much more painful than the tonsillitis. I'm going to read just a quick, if I may, different kind of story from a different kind of story. Many years later, when I'm in Raleigh at Meredith, in my senior year of at college. This comes from a story called Fight and Flight. Academically, everything went smoothly until mid-October. It was then that Dr. Reevely, the head of the education department, asked me to drop by his office for a little talk. Greatly puzzled because my grades were good, I went to his office with no fear. Still, this entire thing seemed a bit mysterious. Hello, and come in, Miss Epps, was Dr. Reevely's welcome. I suppose you're getting excited about doing student teaching in second semester? Oh, yes, I'm looking forward to it. I replied. Miss Epps, he said in a soft voice, how would you like to do your student teaching in Robinson County? Stunned by his question, I sat rigidly as total disbelief and deep anger engulfed every pore of my body. Outraged, I sat in a folding chair beside his desk and said nothing for a few seconds. Then I looked at him straight in the eye and responded in a steely voice that I barely recognized as my own. Absolutely not. I will not do my student teaching in Robinson County. I came to Meredith for my education, and Meredith students don't do their student teaching in Robinson County. They are assigned to a school in the city of Raleigh, public schools, or assigned to Wake County schools. That's where I intend to do my student teaching. Dr. Reevely continued to look at me with eyes that betrayed no emotion, and he spoke in that quiet voice of his I knew so well. Miss Epps, we have a problem. The city of Raleigh schools won't let you be a student teacher in this system. They will not assign you to a white school, and they think it unwise for you to be assigned to a black school. That's the situation. So I thought, as his voice slowly trailed off into nothingness, I knew what he thought and hated every piece of it. All the pent-up anxiety and fear I'd ever felt since I came to Meredith gathered into a mixture of anger, fear, disgust, and courage that exploded as I said in a hard toned voice, Dr. Reevely, that is not my problem. This is your problem, and I expect you to solve it. Make sure that you understand, I will not do student teaching in Robinson County. My parents have paid a lot of money for me to attend Meredith. and they expect that I will be treated just the same as other Meredith students. I expect that too. I don't know how you'll solve your problem, and I really don't care. But no, I will not be doing my student teaching in Robinson County. Then I stood up and walked out of his office. I was in shock. My legs felt weak as I walked the short distance to the quadrangle and lowered my body onto a bench. But it was my heart that worried me. It felt frozen, even as it beat rapidly. Trying to sort out all the different angles of the situation set off all the emotions I felt just a few minutes earlier. Anger, disbelief, dismay, more anger, and finally fear. Cold, hard fear. What if I'd come this far and couldn't graduate from Raleigh? After all the tears and frustrations, and then all the accomplishments and fun, would I be denied a diploma because I couldn't be a student teacher in Raleigh or Wake County? Would my brown Indian skin keep me from graduating? Oh God, this isn't fair, I thought. This is crazy. It's stupid. When would this damn discrimination ever end? So, thank you. That's enough rambling. I will, I think the thing to do is ask for comments, questions. I may not have the answers to any of them, but maybe I'll make some up.
Lena, do you want to continue the slideshow
Yeah.
before the question time?
Well, I've even forgotten what they are. Yes, just do that, please.
All right, it's rolling.
We've seen that one.
See, I know, it's not rolling. Hold on. Not rolling. Now it's rolling. Come on, roll, roll, roll. It's rolling now. And there we go. Okay.
And so I'd like to just chat for a few minutes about the response to the book. It's been interesting. What I had hoped would happen has happened, and that I have been so heartened by the response of my people to the book, most of my people. What they say to me is, you've told the truth about what it was like to live as an American Indian in Jim Crow days. And what that means, people, is that if Indians were ever even mentioned in our textbooks, it was that we were here and not much was said about anything before. Nothing's been much has been brought to date since 1900 in most history books. And the fact that we're such a small percentage of the population and we are localized to Robinson County, surrounding counties, in large numbers there, but in much lesser numbers across the state. A lot of people don't even know that there are Indians in North Carolina except Cherokee. And then, you know, it's casinos or the Trail of Tears. And our people have been here for over 12,000 years. And so people have thanked me for reminding them and their families of what it was like for many of us, it's not everybody didn't go to college, I know that, but the way of the community at that time, the struggles that we had. Also, one interesting thing about the response of Indian people, or two things. People who are more than 50, mostly they say, well, you know, when we tell our children this, they don't believe it, or our grandchildren. It couldn't have been that bad. And they say, oh, well, see, your book has validated what we've been saying to people, because progress has been made. But just because progress has been made doesn't negate the fact that history, our past, needs to be open, and it needs to be factual and about how this impacted people. The other thing that really touched my heart about the response of my people, particularly from the Saponi group, which my father was a part of, was that people have said, this makes it okay for us to now talk about it. We never talked about racism. We lived with it, but we didn't even share the racism that we experienced with our children and grandchildren, because we felt somehow or another it must have been our fault. And so the other thing that's equally exciting, I suppose, not quite as exciting, but very exciting, is that Jim's predictions about the response of the greater community were right. There are a lot of people who didn't know, don't know about Jim Crow and how it affected American Indians in North Carolina. And they're very interested, as you are. And they have been, it has been an educational tool for many people, and I'm very pleased with that. For myself, one of the big awakenings, not awakenings, but what the book has meant to me personally is that aside from believing that it has made more people aware of the challenges and the determination of my people, is that I have met wonderful people because I have traveled sort of all over the state. And here's my everything is family. My two girls, Laura with the shorter hair and Lindsay with the longer hair. And then the handsome young men on the right are my grandsons, James and David. Their mother is Lindsay, and they live in Yorktown, Virginia. And yes, I was so glad when I finally got vaccinated and got to see they were here for Easter week. And they've grown since even this picture, which was made last May. Family is really important to me. It always has been. I'll share with you that neither of my girls have finished reading the book. Act surprised. I remember when Lindsay called me right after the book came out, and she said, I got the book, Mom, and I've been reading it. She said, oh, well, let me rephrase that. I was reading it. And I said, what happened? She said, I got to page so-and-so, and I had to put it down. And I said, you had to put it down? And she said, I couldn't read anymore. And I said, oh, okay. I said, what page is this? And it was the story I just read you. That when she got to that page, and Laura had a similar experience, that the pain, because of their love for me as their mom, the pain that they perceived that I experienced. They said, we didn't want to cry the rest of the book. And I said, you wouldn't, but whatever. So, yeah. And now with all of that being past history, the girls have grown up to be, as I hope, sensitive and respectful of other people, no matter what the difference. No matter what the difference. Because that's what I believe is important. We wouldn't be here as human beings if we weren't worth something of great importance. And when Lindsay was born, a friend of mine who did needlework did a little plaque for me, and it says, I know I'm somebody because God don't make me junk. And I feel that this is, I hope, the message, one of the messages of the book is that that's why we need to respect, be respectful of other people. That's what I was taught. A lot's happened since I started writing the book, and even since the book has been published, including the death of my husband last year. But this picture on the screen is a great reminder for me, and this was made about 10 days ago, that I live on the earth that's full of beauty. There is beauty even on the possibility of beauty on a wet, cold day. Look at that rainbow.
I'm going to let it play, Lena. So
okay, and listen to this.
Yeah.
A beautiful double unity at high heavens. How we are so blessed. Thank you, God.
That was taken from my front deck. And so I remind myself, I don't have to work really hard at it either, that a lot of changes have been made. Some have been very happy, some have been sad. But no matter what, life at high heaven is beautiful. It's good. I'm surrounded by beauty and family who come to visit me and friends. And what more could you ask for in life? And thank you for listening so attentively. And if you have questions, again, I'll try to answer.
We have several folks who have put their questions in the chat, so I will go ahead and do it in the order that you all did it. So thank you so much for that. You really helped me out. The first question is Mike, and Mike, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. I'm going to put everybody in gallery view right now.
Thank you. My question was, where did you do your student teaching? That was a remarkable story you told, and I, like other people, greatly admire your courage and standing up for yourself like that. That's not easy, but I am intrigued as to where you did actually do your student teaching.
I was delighted to do my student teaching at Cary Elementary School. Yay, Pat! My cousin Pat grew up, after 5th grade was it when you moved to Cary, about then? In 4th? Okay. But at Cary Elementary School, it was a wonderful experience. I had a wonderful lead teacher. If there were any objections to my presence, thank goodness nobody told me about them. But I will tell you that I also think that one of the reasons that I was able to do that is that my cousin Pat, who's here, her mother was the first American Indian teacher, I don't know about Wake County, but I know in Cary. And I suspect when Dr. Reevely went to the Wake County, back then it was two separate systems, that my Aunt Lula was beautiful and educated, and she had set the groundwork for those of us to follow. It was a good experience.
Thank you, Mike. So our next question is from Angela Epps, and Angela asks, you mentioned in the book that the voice that came out didn't sound like your own. How and where did you find the courage to stand up to the professor about your student teaching assignment?
I think that by that time, Angela, I had had a lot of experiences with racism, overt, covert, and I'd had a lot in Raleigh. And I think that by that time, I was just so aware that I was so tired of that. You reach a point sometimes that you just, if I had thought about it, I wouldn't have done it because I would have been scared. But I think that as I said, I was just angry. I had worked hard. I had struggled academically my freshman year to stay at Meredith, to be there, because in my mind, and I addressed this in earlier stories about my college experience, I had been number one in my class in high school, but it was a class of 30 people, and we were a rural school. And I came to Meredith without the same preparation, college preparation, as a lot of my classmates. You know, when I went to Wilmington to take the SAT, which I think was the first year they gave it, that high school campus was bigger than Meredith. I mean, it was huge. It was like Needham Broughton. And here I came, and so there were all these experiences that I'd had just to stay in college, not to mention the ones before college. And I'm like, no, I just exploded. I was just angry. And I think that had it been any other way, that I don't know if he would have reacted the same way. I might not have been able to do student teaching there.
Thank you, Lena. Our next question comes from Tricia Wilson. And Tricia, you want to state your question?
Sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned towards the end of the book, maybe some conflicting feelings about how you interacted or felt about Black people. I'm curious, what was your family's perspective about Black people during that time? And did you have any interactions with Black families?
I'm not exactly sure which piece of the book that you're referring to. I think I know it's probably when I was in college.
Yeah, when you were at Poland Baptist, I think you talk about being challenged a little, or maybe you're reflecting and saying, I didn't think about this as much as I wish I had. So.
Let me just say that, as I said earlier, in Robinson County, the population was divided equally between whites, Blacks, and Indians, and yet, except on very rare occasions, there was not interaction between the two groups, especially not social interaction. I always felt growing up, and this was from a very early age, that what I read, I started reading when I was like 4 or 5, and so I read the newspapers. and including the News and Disturber on Sunday. And what I felt about Black people was that, in my mind, based on what I had read and the comments that I had heard, not my family, but my peers say, I felt that Black people were treated even worse than I was, than we were. Now, that was just an impression that I had. I didn't know any Black people growing up until I was, and in our community, there weren't that many Black people. Because even in rural communities, the different heritage groups sort of had their little communities and kept to themselves. And that meant going to church. The only places we ever saw each other were like on the street or at the grocery store. Now, one thing that I've always laughed about is, you know, the grocery stores, they didn't discriminate. They take your money no matter what color you were. And whether they were polite or not, they would take it. But so I didn't have interaction with Black people growing up. I saw them from a distance. I saw them react to the sign. I don't think you can see it here, but I have one of the little signs left over from that era that said, it says white restrooms, white going one way, colored going another way. Okay, so when I came to Meredith, I was there when the civil rights awakening began. I was there when the wars counter in Greensboro was caused everybody to take up and take notice and affected change. I went to Pullen Baptist because, you know, back then we had to go to church at Meredith. You went to church. You got to choose which one you went to, but you went. And so my roommate and I, my freshman and sophomore year, particularly the freshman year, we visited several churches, and I just didn't feel comfortable at them. Nobody said anything. Nobody did anything. I just didn't feel comfortable, which makes sense because I went to, as a child, a church that on a big Sunday had maybe 60 people, and it was just outrageously loaded down with people if you had 100. And most of our pastors were not college educated. Well, some of them were educated because they were teachers, but being a pastor was a second thing, second job. So at any rate, we ended up going to Pullen Baptist to visit. And I just sensed from, and Reverend W.W. Bill Finlater was the pastor then. Do y'all remember him? Any of you remember him? Wild Bill, some people called him. So when I heard him preach his first sermon, and I don't even know what it was about, I'm like, oh boy, this is different. This is different. Because it was about something about justice. And this was before the Greensboro Woolworths. And so I went to Pullen, and it was such an awakening to me. Because he preached from the pulpit about justice, and he preached about that anybody, any color, any socioeconomic background was welcome there. And I'm like, yes, this is a place for me. as far as I heard Dr. Finlater preach about the worth of all white people, black people, red people, polka dotted people, and about our need to, if we were Christians or claiming to be people of God, to treat each other with respect. And then after that Wars week, the next week it was in Raleigh. And I mean, it was in Raleigh, it was at Woolworths downtown. And what I always felt came basically from being naive and not being exposed, knowing any black people. I thought that the people who did the sit-in in Greensboro were extremely brave, and I admired them, but I thought they were sort of crazy because I thought they were going to get killed. And that if their parents were like my parents, they wouldn't want me to be out doing something like that because it was dangerous, physically dangerous. My parents always stressed the worth of all people. If they had heard some of my friends, acquaintances, peers, language about black people, I think my mother would have had a prayer meeting with me, seriously, because no derogatory term about any group of people was ever allowed in my home. And because they believed that all people were of equal value. And when my mother became the supervisor of Indian education for Indian schools in Robeson County, there was a supervisor for white schools, Indian schools, and black schools. You know, you couldn't relate to anybody if they weren't the same colors. So one of my mother's best friends became the supervisor of the black schools in the county, and they shared a lot of interesting experiences together. If you've read the book, you also know that when she became the supervisor, the white supervisor of schools was supposed to mentor her, and they were to share an office, and the white supervisor refused to be in the room with my mother. So, but that changed over the years. They got different supervisors. People became more open to each other. But when I talked about the black students and the way black people were treated, I certainly did not intend to mean that I was uncomfortable with them. I was uncomfortable with the whole situation of what protesting meant at that time, because it was new to me. I had never heard of anybody doing that. Well, they hadn't done that, if you recall. Greensboro and Raleigh was where the civil rights protests by young people began. And does that answer your question? Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Jorge has a question and a comment for you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
First, my comment. I really thank you for the book. I started reading it, and obviously, like you mentioned, it's sad. And at some points, I wanted to put it down. But the truth is that the book impressed me as very fresh. I continuously was wondering, it looks like you're telling a story that happened a few years ago. I kept reading that book and I kept going back to the dates and said, you know, it looks like a recent memory to me. And that freshness actually took me through the whole story, which gets a little bit more happier to the end. And I really thank you for that. There is a lot of artistry in creating a story from long ago, from a time that we want to forget, but is still with us. And that takes me to the second question, perhaps my question, that is that the book highlights something that is very modern, that is
It is
very
important.
modern, that is happening these days, that is
Yes.
race awareness. You mentioned awareness. Your curse was really being continuously aware of your race. And this is also happening in our society. When I came to the States, I'm an immigrant from Argentina, from an immigrant family from Europe. I was reminded all the time that I wasn't white. I was told, you don't look like an Argentine. Or I will be told things like, you cannot possibly be white because you were born in Buenos Aires. The last decade, I have been told that I'm white so many times that it makes me wonder. I fill paperwork, the first thing that they ask me, you are white, and then you're Hispanic. We have created all this continuous race awareness that I'm not really sure is constructive, and I'm not really sure how to move past that to a more integrative thing. And I wanted to hear you, how we can build from now on to get a more a society that is not reflecting continuously in race.
Well, I have no answers, but let me just thank you first of all for your comments about the freshness and all of that. But to the more important point, I think first of all, it's important for us to acknowledge, and some of us are not going to want to hear this. When this country, as we know it, the United States of America, was formed formally, racism was already a factor. The founding fathers, the documents, most of whom we revere, when they talked about equal justice for all people, they were not talking about Black people. They were not talking about brown people. They were talking about equal justice for people like themselves. And when you go back and do some detailed research about the private comments and lifestyle of many of our beginning leaders and all up until today, it's an ugly picture of views of people who weren't white. And this brings me to a point that I want you to remember, that all of us, I'm not just talking to you, but all of us, there's an African proverb that says this, or my approximation of this. Until the lion learns to write, the hunter will tell the story. And for me, what that means,
That's beautiful. Oof.
what that tells me is that we have to acknowledge racism and the differences that our heritages create for us because of that difference. Otherwise, we are not being true to ourselves. We are losing sight of the dignity and respect that all human beings should have. And we, more importantly perhaps, when we are so narrow that we cannot see the beauty of people who are different from us, heritage, race, we are losing out on so much talent, so much interesting stuff in our lives and our communities. When we fail to, and it's, race shouldn't be dividing us. But when you go back and look at history and the silent history, race does matter for all of us. And so how we bring about more awareness and understanding between groups. I'm not an expert, but I think that one of the first things that is important is that when you look at me, I want you to know, how can you not see that I'm brown? And when people say to me, well, when I see you, I don't see your color. And I'm like, well, you need to go have your eyes tuned. I'm brown. And I like being brown. I've never been ashamed of brown. I've never been uncomfortable with brown. I've been uncomfortable with people who are not comfortable with my brownness, if that makes sense. And a part of being brown is acknowledging that and learning about who I am. My people, like you're doing today. But you can't do that if there are no books to read about it, or it's not taught to you, or it's not discussed in your schools. And that includes not just the accomplished part of Lena, but the group of people that Lena's a part of, that she cares about. The people in Robinson County who are still dropping out of school too quickly at too early an age. Because I care about those things for my people, just as you care about the issues with your groups, and some of them are common across the board, particularly with people of color. You see, when you look at me and you go, oh, I mean, she great with the narrative. She has a decent looking house. She speaks the King's English. Do we do that because that's a way of identifying with each other as we are? But you see, that's not all there is to me. And that's not all there is to you. There's stuff that we either are proud of or we hide or both. And I think that a lot of the key is education. And let me just say this, one person cannot speak for a whole ethnic group or heritage group. We can, our lives are different. Our experiences have been different. But I think that we can, and don't think, here's a little hint, don't think that we've met and that you know me. And don't think that I will trust you with my deep gut secrets. It's like any relationship with people who are different. You build trust. You build friendship. You let people share with you as they feel comfortable. And the more you get to know someone, friendship is a basis for getting to know somebody. And that doesn't happen particularly with people of color who have been hurt and betrayed by people from other groups. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Maybe,
it does. Thank you.
maybe
I think
not.
I think that people living together and understanding each other is one of the answers.
It is getting to know each other.
Yeah. And I believe also that culture also runs deep. I mean, and I think that we forget sometimes talking so much about race, we forget the deep cultures from where we come from, and they influence us a lot. I mean, if we look back in time, we find that we are all connected.
Yes, and I think that's one of the big takeaways that I hope that you take away is that we're all children of God. You may not call him God, you may not believe in God. We are all connected because we're human beings. And there is a little thing somewhere in my office in the house frame that says we're all birds and we're all connected. What we do one to the other affects the other. It may not directly, but it does.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Linda Doherty, excuse me. And she says, thank you for writing this book, Lena. Love and respect are the most important lessons to teach our children and ourselves. You're a very brave woman. Where did you get that courage and bravery from? I feel like one of the Lord's gift to us.
Well, that's very sweet. I do think that it's so important, whatever we teach by word or action to our families. Sometimes I think our actions have a more lasting impact than our words. When they see us doing things, having friends who are different heritage, socioeconomics, whatever, gender, sexual orientation, whatever, we're all people. And in my opinion, the call to, if you don't know somebody, you can at least treat them with respect. And even better, get to know somebody. Where the courage came from, I don't consider myself, have never considered myself being a courageous person. I have always been aware of the fact that I've had opportunities that many others of any group have not had. Primarily because my parents were fortunate enough to work hard and get a good education, which in turn allowed them to provide me with the same. And I guess I've had great opportunities for work and to meet a lot of people, to advocate for my people. And I've just never considered it courageous to speak up. I'm not I was not taught well by example. I was taught that you can help perhaps affect change in your own way, in your own style. And that you didn't have to follow somebody else's model. You could just do your thing. And so that's what I've done. I've just been blessed with the opportunity to be in a lot of different places and to advocate not just for my people, but for people to be treated with respect. And so whatever strength I have, whatever there is, whatever courage, whatever insight into the life I have is a gift of God, and I make no apologies for that. I believe strongly that we are given different gifts and different opportunities, and then the choice is whether or not we choose to use them. And sometimes those choices come about as a result of, quote, failure. You know, being fired from one job, and lo and behold, this next job is just perfect. I don't consider that happenstance. I call it a God instinct. And that we are probably most productive when we just take what's given us, whatever it is, and do the best we can with it.
Thank you, Lena. It's good. We have a question from Robin, and it's about the title of your book. She says, selecting a title for a book must be a difficult journey. Can you please share your thoughts about how you selected Hot Dogs on the Road?
Oh, that was so easy. The whole thing about the book was it was, you know, it's a collection of little stories. It's part biographical, of course, but it's a whole lot memoir about. All I wanted to do in the book was show and share the little some stories that are representative of the experiences I had growing up and how my background, my heritage impacted that. So, as I talked to you earlier about writing down the names of the 15 stories or whatever it was, and then going back that afternoon and saying, okay, well, here these are in this category. And I'm like, and so one of the experiences that is just so the period that depicts the period for me personally was that when we would go, I mean, you know, I couldn't go into a restaurant room like people went. I would have been asked out. My mother was there; she could go, but my dad, we had all the colors. Me being the darkest, and my mom being the fairest. And so, going out to eat was not something we did. Of course, most people didn't back then. You know, it was even before McDonald's came along. So, on our way to visit my paternal grandparents from Robinson County to Person County. Person County is just north of Durham County, and it connects to the state of Virginia, right? So back then, going from Robinson County to Person County was about 150 miles, and it took us, you know, all day. You didn't have interstate roads and all that. And we always generally left on a Friday afternoon after my parents got off work. And so, of course, you're going to be hungry. So my mother would pack a picnic lunch. And the most favorite lunch or supper would be cold hot dogs. Wieners, you might call them. In either a slice of bread, white bread, Marita bread. If you're really, really lucky, you got a hot dog bun. And she would make the set sometimes. Now that was when we really, I mean, we were on it with the these hot dogs. Sometimes it was, she made sandwiches. And it was one of the few times that we usually had store-bought cookies. like chocolate chip cookies and we would get on the road, soft drinks, all that in a bag, 2 bags, and we would start driving. And depending on how far, what time we left, generally we would make it up to Fayetteville. And we would get just past Fayetteville, and there was a grove of trees, a small grove of trees off the road. And that became our favorite eating spot. And my dad would pull the car over to the side of the road. There were pine trees. Look at the cover of the book. That's what it looked like, exactly. And we would sit on the logs. And, if the boys had to go to the bathroom, they went over behind the tree. My brothers were younger, and we had our picnics there. For me, that event was the perfect symbol for the name of the book, because it reflected what was necessary for our family, not perhaps others, to be connected to our family forever. Find a place that you could eat safely as you're on the road, because you can't go into restaurants. And my brothers and I thought, oh, you know, nobody's going to talk to you about sitting up straight to eat your hot dog while you're out in the woods, you know, sitting on a log or a stump. And the other thing that stayed with me, and actually I really didn't realize until I was way past adulthood, was that was the way that my parents protected us for many years from the pain of racism. We just thought we were having a picnic. Oh, picnic, picnic, surprise, what you gonna give us to eat tonight? We thought it was delightful. We never considered it when we were very young a punishment. And it's interesting because I've heard other families talk about this. And one night, again, my brothers and I are sitting at my dining room table here, and one brother said, oh my word, just think of all the things they did to protect us when we were really young, to keep us innocent, to keep us from forming images and feelings about other people that would be negative. So that's how I got the name of the title for the book, Hot Dogs on the Road.
Cool. Thanks, Lena. So
Thank
we have about 15 minutes left we're going to end at noon. It's been a wonderful discussion. We still have a few folks who ask questions, so I want to make sure everyone gets their question answered. The next question is from Tracy Barton Barrett, and she had a question about Lena, and I warned you about this one. What's your favorite sentence in the book?
Well, I'm glad you warned me. It didn't take me long to
Prepped is the right word.
it didn't take me long to know which one it was. Do you want me to read it or say it, or both? My favorite sentence in the book is not the best constructed sentence. It is not a lyrical sentence. It is the last sentence in the story that I read from you for the first one, Sicker Than Before. And that sentence, and I want to make sure I read it correctly. I should know it. I've read it so many times. But here's the sentence that is my favorite. Yes, I was sicker than before Daddy had taken me to town to be made well. The reason that sentence is my favorite one is that it encapsulates for me my feelings, my 8-year-old feelings, and still my feelings today about the evil impact that racism has. It was the first time I had experienced direct racism. And to have to do it at that age was really, really hard. But it prepared me, with the help of my parents over the years, to turn to family, let them be my strength, and to know that I was still going to be okay. When I got home, I would be okay because I would be surrounded by them. Sticks and stones, yeah, they hurt. Words really hurt. Exclusion hurts. But when you have been made sick by whatever, you have two choices. You can try to be made well, or you can do nothing and get sick. And I have never liked being sick. So it was a shock to me as an 8-year-old to know that there were adults who would judge me based on my color. It was a huge shock. And I was sick. I was sick, much sicker than when I got there. And that was heart sick. That was heart sick. At 8 years old, I realized that if this woman would do this, somebody else probably would too. But there was a way to combat that because my dad and my mother talked, and they said the sickness was not worth worrying about, that kind of sickness. Heart sick because of who I was, and that won't do this. She was wrong. She was the person who had the sickness of not liking people.
Lena, that was one of my favorite lines in the book too. So thank you.
Was it?
Yeah, thank you for writing it. We've got, two of our people have made some comments and I want to read them out and then we
Okay.
have time for 2 more questions. I have to teach banjo at 12:30. So that's why I'm going to have to, noon is the wrap up date. So.
Oh no, that's what you had said, and this is.
Yeah. So
I'll be ready for some coffee now.
All right, I know this is cool. Thank you, Lena. This has been a beautiful morning.
Do you want me to comment? Am I to comment on the
No, I'm
comments?
just going to read. I'm going to read so
Okay.
that you can hear,
Okay.
and that you can hear too, so you don't have to read
Okay.
the chat. This is from Jennifer Weiss and Lena. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and telling your story. I had the privilege of working with Lena in the early '90s in Raleigh, and she was wise then too. Thank you, Jennifer, for that. It's great to have you with us today. And
Thank you.
Joy and Phil, they had to scoot. They had the work thing at noon. My husband and I loved your book, Lena. I continued to think about the experiences growing up that we shared. I had my tonsils out at 12, and oh, the pain. I also loved reading your experiences as a freshman in college because up until that point, I thought that you were so much better behaved than I was. I was glad to learn that you also enjoyed a very active social life. Their stories of racism were eye-opening to us because we grew up in Pennsylvania. We did not have any experience with individuals of American Indian heritage. You are a beautiful spirit, and we thank you for sharing your stories with us today. I have a work meeting at noon and had to prepare for it. Thank you so much. So I'm going to turn over to Gerald because he's had his hand raised for a while. And Angela, you'll be our last question. I think I covered everybody who had an opportunity. Yes. Okay, cool. All right. Gerald, go ahead and unmute yourself.
I
Yeah,
can't.
took
I
me a
hear
moment to figure that out. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your stories with us. Those of us that haven't experienced anything like what you did starting at age 8 need to know what it's like for people to both go and grow through such things. It doesn't surprise me you had what it took to confront that, was it a dean at Meredith?
the head of the education department.
Yeah, it didn't surprise me at all. You had what it took to confront that person. When you have experiences starting at that young an age that create that much discomfort, that much hurt, and it just builds over time, and you're suddenly in the foxhole, it's going to come out. I mean, it's just going to. And I'm glad you did. I'm a native of Wake County, grew up in Raleigh, in Wake County. My first 16 years are the last 16 years of Jim Crow. I graduated high school in 1966, so I'm not surprised you had a hard time getting a teaching job, teaching student teaching assignment, and I knew you would. I had no doubt for what you had said that you would. And again, thank you for sharing all of this with us. We need to hear it and know about it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gerald. And Angela, you get the last word. And Angela had a question about,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I look forward to reading, but I have really good friends who are in the Halawasa Pony community. And it's very, sort of insular, and they have really held on to their native traditions.
Right.
And what I wanted to know are there aspects of American Indian culture that you'd want to champion as valuable to the broader communities? Much like you said about the lion, until the lion writes, then the hunter tells the story. Are there aspects of American culture, Native American culture, that you think would be worth really championing? If that makes
An
sense.
excellent question. And yes, I would. They may or may not be seen as traditional values from, well, let me just go back and say, our Indian people in this state, there are about 55,000 of us. We are a very small group, and we have been assimilated, amalgamated, ostracized, included, and we remain, for many of us, particularly those of us who don't leave our home communities, we remain very, very tied to the community. And when I think of the Howlahs, the Saponis, which was my dad, which was much smaller even than the Saponis, the focus on family, faith, and friends. To the land is to that community. And a good example of this is my Dad's family always has a family reunion on the Saturday closest to August 16th. And that is because August 16th was my granddaddy's birthday. And this connection, this huge family, he had 10 brothers and sisters who lived, and they all had big families except 2 of them. They chose this date, that's significant, as a way to honor their elders. Not just random come July the 4th, that's Independence Day. This is about family, dad, granddad. And people, a lot of our Saponi relatives lived in Virginia, in the Richmond area. And if you went and talked to these relatives in Virginia about the Epps reunion, what they would tell you most likely is, I can't wait to go down home. Down home. Richmond is just sort of, we like it up here, but we're going home. Faith to family, where life is simple, where we're trying to hold on, keep the family ties, because they're already gone, but that connection. And I think that's very true with the majority of people in many communities. Now, what's happened in Indian communities, Lumbee people still, many of them go home for certain occasions, events. And then there are people like myself who haven't lived there. I left when I was 16, because that's when I went to college. And of course I went back. But, and I have a real connection to home, the home I grew up in. But it's not the same tie as living there or having a lot of family who still there. So I think that the way what you see in the Halawa community is pretty typical people, unless they've had a really bad family experience. There is a certain tie to the community, and the family traditions, and not traditions like necessarily dancing or, I'm not gifted with any kind of crafts making, but just to the place that was your birth home. Whether you like the way you were treated growing up, it's still your birth home. Would I want to live there now? No, because most people haven't come around to being open to others. Is that answer your question? Thank you.
Lena, thank you so much for the time today. The time went by so fast. And thank you all for coming. A lot of new faces today. Jennifer, Pat, Linda, I think, and Angela, yeah.
And Cousin Pat.
Cousin Pat, for coming. And it was a blessing that we connected this week and we could have you here today. And Lena, thank you for sharing so much of your life, your story, your talent, and your beauty inside and out, and your words with us. Thank you all so much. And we'll have the recording out in a bit, so stay tuned. And
will you also put my email in case anyone wants one or more books? That would be fine to share that.
I will.
Or to you, whatever you do. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
I'll share it out. So, folks, if you have, this is my email here. I'm putting my email out, which is just, okay, it's just alice@aliceosborne.com. If you go to my website, don't have an E at the end of the name, you can find me. I'm all over the place. Fortunately, unfortunately, just find me and I will get you your information, because that's what I love, helping you. Okay. Bye, everybody.
And thank you so much.
Bye. Mwah.
Happy May. Bye-bye.